Okay, so this is a second video dealing with the first video on Calvinism. Does God hate? Does God hate, basically, or does God hate sinners? This goes totally against what Scripture says, to believe that God hates like persons, individual persons. I dealt with Jacob and Esau in the first video, but I've had some people answer me. Saying that, well, God really does hate sinners. They try to quote Psalm 139. They try to say that. Well, anyway, they take different passages in the Old Testament specifically to try to renounce my belief that this is so. So I refer to, for instance, Matthew, where Jesus says, unless you hate your father, mother, sister, brother, etc. I'm paraphrasing here, obviously. You cannot be my disciple. Well, is he calling us to hate our mothers and fathers? Or is this hyperbolic? Is he trying to figuratively show us that we're our whole emphasis to follow him first and foremost? Obviously, he's not saying to hate our father and mother, because if he would be, Jesus himself would be transgressing the fifth commandment, which is to honor the father and mother, and he'd be teaching us to do the same. When you look at other passages, I think I referred to in Genesis 29, 30 and 31, where Jacob had two wives. He had Leah and he had Rebecca. Well, he obviously loved Rebecca more. He fell in love with her. But it says that he loved Leah less. Nevertheless, it shows that he did his duty as a husband, and he respected her in trying to raise children. Now, he knew that Leah was barren, yet it still says that he was having interactions with her sexually, which supposes that he did love her in one sense, in a way of respect and a love of loyalty to her as a husband. He just didn't love her as much as he loved Rebecca. In the second verse, God says, that he sees that Jacob, that Leah was not loved. Well, what does he mean by that? Well, we have to take the whole thing into context, right? He's talking about God is seeing that she is not being loved in the same way that Rebecca is being loved. She's being loved, but not the way she ought to be, in that sense, even though he is still trying to give her children. He's still respecting her and loving her in the sense of a husband duty and things like that. He didn't try to divorce her. He didn't try to get rid of her, anything like that. Now, where people try to say that, David talks about in Psalm 139 that he's hating God's enemies and all these different types of things. We have to keep in mind that hate also means it's to despise all those things. And yeah, he's despising the enemies, but there's a context surrounding that too. And David, and when, not only that, he's talking about his enemies in distinction to just generally people or persons. It's a group of people that he's talking about. Now, what we have to look at in the passage in Psalm 139 and the other Psalms that are following that, like 140, 141, those kind of things, is David uses a lot of what's called exaggeration or hyperbole. This is what the Hebrews do when they wrote. They wrote in a very exaggerated form. It's a lot of hyperbole, and Jesus was no exception to that. Jesus did that. He spoke in parables. He spoke in exaggerations. Unless you remove your eye, all these different types of things. Unless you cut off your arm. Well, obviously, Jesus is not telling us to cut off our arm or take out our eye, because that would be mutilation, which would again be he wouldn't be fulfilling the law. He would be transgressing against it, because the law of the Mosaic law, Torah law, speaks about not mutilating oneself and all these different types of things. So what is Jesus saying? He's using it as an example, as a hyperbolic expression of what he views sin as and what God the Father views sin as. So we have to look at those things in context. We look at Matthew when Jesus talks about not hating fathers and mothers, talk about Genesis, and there's other passages as well. We have to realize in the whole context of Scripture, it says in the Bible that Jesus is the exact imprint of God the Father, right? He is everything that the Father is in character, in spirit, and in truth. He is the Word, basically, of the Trinity, of the Father. And doing so, what he says must be the will of the Father. He does everything in the will of the Father. He says this himself. Jesus says this. I do the will of the Father in all things. And when Jesus expresses that, he cries out that he, wishes that none should perish, or that, is long-suffering, not wishing that anyone should perish, even if the Spirit's speaking through his apostles to these things, or when Jesus himself cries out to Jerusalem, how I wish how I wish I could take you under my wing, but you're not willing to do what I want to do. All these things, and an expression of sorrow, an expression of care, an expression of love. When Jesus sits down, who does he sit down with? He sits down with sinners, right? He doesn't despise them. He doesn't hate them. He comes to save sinners. He comes. That's who he died for. He died sinners. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. This is God the Father's imprint. This is his character. Not a character of hate. Not a character of wanting to destroy. There's misconception even in the Torah law where God is condemning everyone to death. And that's not so. You see in many different examples, which I'm going to go through in another video to talk more explicitly about these things, where people were ostracized from the community. People were anathematized, in a sense, just like Paul was doing in the New Testament when he was anathematizing certain people who were clearly sinning in the community. And God, that's what God wish was specifically, is he didn't want to kill people. He wanted to have them learn from their mistakes, have them to learn, and the people to learn from their sin, not to be this angry God that kills everybody. There's so much more to say about these things, and if you look at the clear passages, or even the obscure passages in the Old Testament, majority of the time it's talking about the sin of a nation. It's the sin altogether, these things that have come over and over that God has put up with for so long, and now he just can't put up with these things any longer. He never talks about a personal person, like one particular person that he hates, and he wants to destroy them because he hates them, in a sense. So we need to think about these things. We need to look at these things in all the context of Scripture and to see what is the character of Christ. Because the character of Christ is the exact imprint of God the Father.
Thanks.